Chapter 11. Seamen's Wages. Affected by desertion or absence, by misconduct, by imprisonment, by capture, by loss of vessel and interruption of voyage, wages on an illegal voyage, wages affected by death or disability, wages affected by desertion or absence. It has been seen that if a seaman, at the commencement of the voyage, neglects to render himself on board at the time appointed, and an entry thereof is made in the logbook, he forfeits 1 day's pay for every hour's absence. And if he shall wholly absent himself, so that the ship is obliged to go to sea without him, he forfeits his advance and as much more. Act 1790, Chapter 56, Section 2. And if at any time during the voyage he absents himself without leave, and returns within 48 hours, he forfeits 3 days' pay for every day's absence. But if he is absent more than 48 hours, he forfeits all the wages then due to him, and all his clothes and goods on board at the time. Act 1790, Chapter 56, Section 4. These forfeitures cannot be exacted against the seaman unless there is an entry made in the logbook on the same day that he left, specifying the name of the seaman, and that he was absent without leave. Gilpin 83, 140, 207, where 309. But independently of these regulations, and without the necessity of any entry, etc., a seaman forfeits his wages for deserting the vessel, or absenting himself wrongfully and without leave, by the general law of all commercial nations, where 309. If, however, the seaman is absent without fault of his own, 1 Mason 45, B 134, 48. Or if he is obliged to desert by reason of cruel treatment, want of food, or the like, he does not forfeit his wages. But in such case, the seaman must prove that the treatment was such that he could not remain without imminent danger to his life, limbs, or health. 1 Pet Ad 186, Gilpin 225, 2 Pet Ad 420, 428, Ware 83, 91, 109. If the voyage for which he shipped has been abandoned, or there has been a gross and unnecessary deviation, he does not forfeit his wages for leaving the vessel. But then the change of voyage must have been actually determined upon and known to the seaman. Gilpin 150, 2 Pet Ad 415. Even if the seaman shall have clearly deserted without justifiable cause, or absented himself more than 48 hours, yet, if he shall offer to return and do his duty, the master must receive him, unless his previous conduct would justify a discharge. 1 Sumner 373. And if he is so received back, and does his duty faithfully for the rest of the voyage, the forfeiture is considered as remitted, and he is entitled to his wages for the whole voyage. 2 Wash 272, Gilpin 145, 1 Sumner 373, 1 Pet Ad 160. If, however, the owner has suffered any special damage from the wrongful absence of the seaman, as if the vessel has been detained, or a man hired in his place, all such necessary expenses may be deducted from the wages. Gilpin 145, 298, 98. A mere leaving of the vessel, though a wrongful absence, is not a desertion unless it is done with the intention to desert. 1 Sumner 373, Ware 309. A seaman is bound to load and unload cargo in the course of the voyage if required of him, and a refusal to do so is a refusal of duty. 1 Pet Ad 253. If the voyage is at an end, according to the articles, and the vessel is safely moored at the port of discharge, the seamen are still bound to discharge the cargo if it is required of them. If they do not, their refusal or neglect does not, however, work a forfeiture of all their wages, but only makes them liable to a deduction, as compensation to the owner for any damage he may have suffered. 1 Sumner 373, Gilpin 208. The custom in almost all seaports of the United States is to discharge the crew, and not to require them to unload cargo at the end of the voyage. This custom is so strong that if the owner or master wishes to retain the crew, he must give them notice to that effect. Unless the crew are distinctly told that they must remain and discharge cargo, they may leave the vessel as soon as she is safely moored, or made fast. If they are required to remain and discharge cargo, they make themselves liable to a deduction from their wages for neglect or refusal, but do not forfeit them. 1 Sumner 373, Gilpin 208. The seaman must bear in mind, however, that this is only when the voyage is at an end, and the ship is at the final port of discharge. If he refuses to load or unload at any port in the course of the voyage, and before it is up, according to the articles, he does so at the risk of forfeiting all his wages. 1 Pet Ad 253. The master and owners of a vessel are allowed 10 days after the voyage is up, before a suit can be brought against them for the wages of the crew. Act 1790, Chapter 56, Section 6. This is in order to give them time to settle all accounts and discover delinquencies. If the crew are retained to unload, then the 10 days begin to run from the time the vessel is completely unloaded. But if the crew are not retained for this purpose, but are discharged and allowed to leave the vessel, then the 10 days begin to run from the day they are discharged. 1 Pet Ad 165, 210, Ware 458. Darl Ad PR 99. Wages affected by desertion or absence in England. See note to Chapter 4, title Shipment. If any seaman, after having signed the ship's articles, or after the ship has left her first port of clearance, wilfully and without leave absent himself from the ship, or his duty, he forfeits, in all cases not of absolute desertion, or not treated as such by the master, out of his wages to the master or owner, the amount of 2 days' pay for every 24 hours of absence, and in a like proportion for any less period of time, or at the option of the master, the amount of such expenses as have been necessarily incurred in hiring a substitute to perform his work. If, after the ship's arrival at her port of delivery, and before her cargo is discharged, any seaman quits the ship without a previous discharge or leave from the master, he forfeits to the master or owner 1 month's pay of his wages. But no such forfeiture is incurred, unless the fact of such seaman's temporary absence, neglect of duty, or quitting the ship be duly entered or recorded in the ship's logbook, and this entry must specify truly the hour of the day at which it occurred, and the period during which the seaman was absent or neglected his duty, the truth of which entry it shall be incumbent on the owner or master, in all cases of dispute, to substantiate by the evidence of the mate or some other credible witness. 5 and 6 William IV, Chapter 19, Section 7. It has been decided that this section of the Act applies to the case of the quitting of a ship after her arrival in her port of delivery, but before the discharge of her cargo. 4 M&W 285. If a seaman absolutely desert the ship, he forfeits to the owner or master all wages and emoluments to which he might otherwise have been entitled, and also the clothes and effects he may have left on board, provided the circumstances attending such desertion be entered in the logbook at the time, and certified by the signature of the master, mate, or other credible witness, and the absence of a seaman from the ship for any time within the space of 24 hours immediately preceding the sailing of the ship, without permission of the master, or for any period, however short, under circumstances plainly showing an intention not to return, is to be deemed an absolute desertion. 5 and 6 William IV, Chapter 19, Section 9. It has also been determined that this section of the Act applies to the case of the desertion of a ship whilst in foreign parts. 4 M&W 285. A mode of ascertaining the amount of these forfeitures, where the seaman has contracted for the voyage or the run, is expressly provided by the Act, Section 8. If a mariner quit the ship with leave of the master, and when ordered to return, refuses to do so, his wages are forfeited. See Abbott on Shipping, 6th edition, 578, and cases there cited. It has been already stated that the entry into the service of Her Majesty is not deemed a desertion, nor followed by the forfeiture of wages. But where a mariner quitted a vessel in defiance of the master, with opprobrious language, and without any declaration of such intention when he quitted the vessel, entered on board a king's ship within 24 hours, it was held to be a desertion, working a forfeiture of wages. 2 Hagad Rep. 403. Abbott on Shipping, 6th edition, 581. A forfeiture may be waived by the party entitled to take advantage of it. 2 Campbell, 590, and 5 and 6 William IV, Chapter 19, Section 7. But a forfeiture is not waived by the acceptance of a seaman's services whilst the ship is in distress, unless such acceptance be continued when the necessity for them has ceased. 3 C&P 3. As regards the time of payment of wages, by the 5 and 6 William IV, Chapter 19, it is enacted that the master or owner shall pay to every seaman entering into such contract as aforesaid, i.e., the ship's articles, his wages, if the same shall be demanded, within the respective periods following. That is to say, if the ship shall be employed in trading coastwise, the wages shall be paid within 2 days after the termination of the agreement, or at the time when the seaman shall be discharged, whichever shall first happen. And in every other case the wages shall be paid at the latest within 3 days after the cargo shall have been delivered, or within 10 days after the seaman's discharge, whichever shall first happen. In which two cases of delayed payments, the seaman shall, at the time of his discharge, be entitled to be paid on account 1/4 part of the estimated balance due to him, and if any master or owner shall neglect or refuse to make payment in the manner required, he shall, for every such neglect or refusal, forfeit to the seaman the amount of 2 days' pay, for each day, not exceeding 10 days, during which payment shall, without sufficient cause, be delayed beyond the period described, for the recovery of which forfeiture the seaman shall have the same remedies as he is entitled to for the recovery of the wages. Section 11. The preceding clause is not to extend to the case of ships employed in the southern whale fishery, or on voyages for which seamen, by the terms of their agreement, are compensated by shares in the profits of the adventure. No assignment of wages made prior to the earning of them shall be valid or binding upon the party making it. If a seaman, after having been discharged 3 days, shall be desirous of proceeding to sea on another voyage, and in order thereto shall require immediate payment of the wages due to him, it shall be lawful for any justice of the peace, on his application, and on satisfactory proof that he would, by delay, be prevented from obtaining employment, to summon the master or owner before him, and if no satisfactory reason shall be assigned for further delay, such justice shall order payment to be made forthwith. In default of compliance with which order, the master or owner shall forfeit £5. Section 14. Wages affected by misconduct. A seaman may forfeit his wages by gross misconduct, and if not forfeited, he may be liable to have a deduction made from them, for any damage caused to the owner by such misconduct. To create a forfeiture, his misbehavior must be gross and aggravated. Formason 84. B. 148. A single act of disobedience or a single neglect of duty will not deprive him of his wages. Formason 84. A refusal to do duty in a moment of high excitement caused by punishment will not forfeit wages, unless followed by obstinate perseverance in such refusal. Formason 84. Where drunkenness is habitual and gross, so as to create a general incapacity to perform duty, it is a ground of forfeiture of wages. but occasional acts of drunkenness, if the seaman in other respects performs his duty, will not deprive him of his wages. 2 Hag 2, 4 Mason 541. In this, as in all cases of neglect, disobedience, or willful misconduct, which do not create a forfeiture, a deduction may be made if the owner has suffered any loss. 4 Mason 541, 1 Sumner 384, B 237, 2 Hag 420, Gilpin 150, 1 Pet Ad 168. In one instance, a forfeiture of 1/2 of a seaman's wages was decreed, in consequence of his striking the master. He did not forfeit the whole, because he had been otherwise punished. B 184. If the seaman is imprisoned for misconduct, he does not forfeit the wages that accrued during his confinement, nor, what amounts to the same thing, is he bound to pay those of a person hired in his place during his imprisonment. Gilpin 83, 140, 33, Ware 9. If the crime of a seaman is against the laws of the United States, and too great for the master's authority to punish, he must be confined and brought home to trial. But this does not forfeit his wages, though any loss or damage to the owner may be deducted. 1 Pet Ad 168. In all cases of forfeiture of wages for misconduct, it is only the wages due at the time of the misconduct that are lost. The wages subsequently earned are not affected by any previous misbehavior. 4 Mason 84. If a seaman or officer is evidently incapable of doing the duty he shipped for, he may be put upon other duty, and a reasonable deduction may be made from his wages. Ware 109. Wages affected by misconduct in England. If any seaman, without sufficient cause, neglects to perform such duty as shall reasonably be required of him by the master or other person in command of the ship, he is subject to a like forfeiture, as in case of absence, in respect of every offence, and of every 24 hours continuance of it. 5 and 6 William IV, Chapter 19, Section 7. Any cause which will justify the master in discharging a seaman during the voyage will also deprive the seaman of his wages. 2 Rob Ad Rep 261. Wages affected by imprisonment. If a seaman is imprisoned by a warrant from a judge or justice of the peace, within the limits of the United States, for desertion or refusal to render himself on board, he is liable to pay the cost of his commitment and support in jail, as well as the wages of any person hired in his place. Gilpin 223. So, if a seaman is imprisoned in a foreign port by the authorities of the place for a breach of their laws, the costs and loss to the owner may be deducted from his wages, but not so if he is imprisoned at the request of the master. Gilpin 223. The right of the master to imprison at all is a doubtful one, and dangerous of exercise, and if he does resort to it, he can never charge the expenses to the seamen, nor deduct their wages during imprisonment. Ware 19, 503, Gilpin 83, 233. Wages affected by imprisonment in England. It is apprehended that if a seaman should do any act which would justify the master in ordering him to be imprisoned, such seaman could not recover wages for the time of his imprisonment, but on the contrary, would be answerable to the owners for any loss or damage they might sustain through his misconduct, and it would seem they might set off such loss or damage against a demand of wages. 2 Hag Ad Rep 243. Wages affected by capture. If a neutral ship is captured, it is the right and duty of the seaman to remain by the vessel until the case is finally settled. 2 Sumner 443, 1 Pet Ad 128. If she is liberated, they are then entitled to their wages for the whole voyage, and if freight is decreed, they are entitled to their wages for as much of the voyage as freight is given. 2 Gall 178. 2 Sumner 443. If at any future time the owners recover the vessel, or her value, upon appeal or by treaty, they are liable for wages. 3 Mason 161. In order to secure his wages in these cases, the seaman must remain by the vessel until her sale or condemnation, and the master cannot oblige him to take his discharge. 1 Mason 45. The condemnation or sale of the vessel puts an end to his contract. If he leaves before the condemnation or sale, with the master's consent, he does not lose his chance of recovering his wages. 1 Mason 45. Even if the vessel is condemned, and the owner never recovers the vessel or its value, yet the seaman is entitled to his wages up to the last port of delivery, and for half the time she lay there. 1 Pet Ad 203. Wages affected by capture in England. The payment of wages depends generally upon the successful termination of the voyage. If in the course of the voyage a total loss or capture of the ship takes place, the seamen lose their wages. Abbott on Shipping, 6th edition, 571. It has been held that the condemnation of a vessel for illegal trading on the part of the master, to which the mariners were not parties, does not work a forfeiture of wages, or bar the mariners' action against the owners. 2 Hag ad Rep 158. The payment of wages is divisible, and if a ship has delivered its cargo at one place, the wages are so far due, although the ship be afterwards taken or sunk. But if a ship sail to one place, in order to take in a cargo there to be conveyed to another place, and having received the cargo accordingly, be taken before its arrival at the place of delivery, nothing is payable to the seaman for navigating the ship to the first place. Abbott, 572. Wages affected by loss of vessel or interruption of voyage. If a vessel meets with a disaster, it is the duty of the crew to remain by her so long as they can do it with safety, and to exert themselves to the utmost of their ability to save as much as possible of the vessel and cargo. Ware 49, 1 Pet 204. If they abandon the vessel unnecessarily, they forfeit all their wages, and if their leaving was necessary and justifiable, yet they lose their wages except up to the last port of delivery, and for half the time the vessel was lying there, or for so long as she was engaged with the outward cargo. Pet CC 182, 3 Sumner 286. This rule may seem hard, but its object is to secure the services of the crew in case of a disaster. If by their exertions any parts of the vessel or cargo are saved, they are entitled to wages, and an extra sum for salvage. Ware 49, Gilpin 79, 2 Mason 319, 1 Hag 227. If the vessel is abandoned and nothing is saved, they lose their wages, except up to the last port of delivery, and for half the time the vessel was lying there. 2 Mason 329, 1 Pet Ad 204, 130. 2 Pet Ad 309, the 1. 11 Mass 545. The general rule is that a seaman's wages are secure to him whenever the vessel has earned any freight, whatever may afterwards happen, and a vessel earns freight at every port where she delivers any cargo. For the benefit of seamen, a vessel is held to earn freight whenever she goes to a port under a contract for freight, though she go in ballast. 2 Mason 319, 1 Pet Ad 207. A seaman also secures his wages wherever the ship might have earned freight, but for the agreement or other act of the owner. 3 Sumner 286, 2 Mason 319, 2 Hag 158. If a vessel is on a trading voyage from port to port and is lost on the homeward passage, wages would probably be allowed for the outward passage, and for half the time she was engaged in trading with the old or new cargoes, the trading and going from port to port being considered the same as though she had been lying in port all the time, and discharging and receiving cargo. Or else, wages would be given up to the last port at which she took in any return cargo, and for half the time she was lying there. Pet CC 182, 2 Pet Ad 390. These rules apply only to cases where the voyage is broken up by inevitable accidents, as by perils of the seas, capture, war, or superior force. If the voyage is broken up by the fault of the seamen, they lose all their wages. If, on the other hand, the seamen are compelled to leave, or the voyage is broken up by the fault of the master or owner, as by cruel treatment, want of provisions, or the like, the crew would be justly entitled to wages for the whole voyage contracted for. If the vessel is sold, or the voyage altered or abandoned by the master or owner, not from inevitable necessity, but for their own interest and convenience, then the crew are entitled, by statute, to wages for all the time they were on board, and 2 months extra pay. Act 1803, Chapter 62, Section 3. And, by the general law, they would always receive some extra wages as a compensation for the loss of the voyage, and as a means of supporting themselves and procuring a passage home, or perhaps full wages for the voyage. 2 Pet Ad 264, B 48, 2 Gall 182, 2 Gall 182, 3 Johns R 518. Wages affected by loss of vessel or interruption of voyage in England. See the last note. If a ship become disabled on the voyage, the seamen lose their wages. But if the ship has earned its freight, the seamen who have served on board the ship have in like manner earned their wages. And if a ship sails to several places, wages are payable to the time of the delivery of the last cargo. And where money is advanced to the owners in part of the freight outward, and the ship perishes before her arrival at the port of delivery, the seaman will be entitled to wages in proportion to the money advanced. Abbott, 558. Wages are not lost by the hypothecation of the ship, nor even by the sale of it, unless the sale be made under the authority of a competent court, nor by the ship being wrecked, if the seamen assist in saving from the wreck sufficient to pay them. Abbott, 571. It is the duty of every mariner to exert himself to the utmost to save as much as possible of the vessel and cargo, and he is not entitled to any remuneration for such exertions beyond the wages stipulated to be paid to him. 1 Hag Ad Rep 227. Wages on an illegal voyage. A seaman has no remedy for his wages upon an illegal voyage, as for instance in the slave trade. 9 Wheat 409, 6 Rob 207, 2 Mason 58, Edward 35. Wages have, however, been allowed where it was proved that the seaman was innocent of all knowledge of or participation in the illegal voyage. 9 Wheat 409. Wages affected by death or disability. If a seaman dies during the voyage, wages are to be paid up to the time of his death. B. 254, 441. A seaman is entitled to all his wages during sickness, and during any time he was disabled from performing duty. But if his sickness or disability is brought on by his own fault, as by vice or willful misconduct, a deduction may be made for the loss of his services. 1 Pet Ad 142, 138. So where the death of a seaman was caused by his own unjustifiable and wrongful acts, his wages were held forfeited. 1 Pet Ad 142. If a seaman at the time he ships is laboring under a disease which incapacitates or is likely to incapacitate him during the voyage, and he conceals the same, no wages will be allowed him, or a deduction will be made from them, according to the nature of the case. 2 Pet Ad 263. If, in consequence of sickness, a seaman is left at a foreign port, he is still entitled to wages for the whole voyage. B. 414, 2 Gall 46, 1 Pet 117. Wages on an illegal voyage, wages affected by death or disability, in England. The observations under these respective heads are applicable to British vessels.